Their disagreement gave them the excuse for action. West Berlin they could not touch, but they could and did interfere with the lifelines on which West Berlin depended. The roads, the railways, the canals, these were West Berlin's vital arteries. So stop the trains. Close the roads. Bar the canals and cut the power. West Berlin was 100 miles deep in the Soviet zone of Germany. This was to be the way to force the Western Allies to quit Berlin. Thus, 2 million people were isolated, to be faced with the prospect of hunger, cold, unemployment, and misery. No way in, no way out. The only element still open, the air above. It started as a trickle, as a temporary measure. Plane after plane. Destination, the airfields of West Berlin. The vital necessities, food, raw materials, even coal brought in by air, until the United States, Great Britain and France were embarked upon the biggest air transport operation history has ever seen. Round the clock, plane after plane. Even flying boats to set down on West Berlin's lakes. In the beleaguered city, power shortage enforced skeleton transport services. Food shortage necessitated careful distribution and queues. But rather short measure than surrender. As each night fell, the roar of aero engines continued. Dependent for the most part on power from the eastern sector, West Berlin was plunged each night into a blackout. But while West Berliners felt their way through the gloom, still their airlift continued through the hours of darkness. When West Berliners rose each dawn, it was again to the roar of planes. But because of those planes, there was bread in the shops. And this was to be the pattern for many a hard month ahead. It was to be expected that the Soviets would not take the airlift without some reaction. Across the eastern boundary, the communists staged demonstrations against what they called this Western interference with Berlin affairs. These in turn led to riots that forced the non-communist councillors to abandon the Berlin town hall, which lay in the eastern sector. But in the western sectors, unity against the blockade was overwhelming, symbolized by the leadership of Ernst Reuter.
Nicht preisgeben könnt, ihr Völker der Welt, ihr Völker in Amerika.
Any joint administration of Berlin as a whole had already ceased to exist, a fact emphasized by the abandonment by the Russians of the Allied Kommandatura. City government for Greater Berlin was impossible, since the Western councillors had been driven from the east. So Reuter and the non-communists moved into new quarters in the west. And at their meetings, empty chairs stood witness to the fact that the East Berliners were denied the right to choose their representatives freely. For the West, the Berlin blockade came as the last straw. Soviet behavior had demonstrated that no one was safe. After much negotiation, 12 nations came together to form an alliance for collective defense. Its name, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or, as it came to be known, NATO. Together in Washington in April 1949, they put the seal on their union. They were resolved, as they put it, to unite their efforts for collective defense and the preservation of peace and security. It was to be the end of leaning over backwards in the face of consistent Soviet expansion. Meanwhile, for West Berlin, it had been a tough winter. On the airfields, fog, mist, and freezing cold. Yet in spite of the conditions, the airlift had carried on. In spite of the conditions and the losses. By means of the airlift, West Berlin had been kept alive, but only at a cost. All the sufferings of war in the midst of peace. But there could be no turning back now. If the Russians thought that the city could not be supplied indefinitely by air, they were going to be proved very wrong. For the airlift, all possible reinforcement. More planes. Improved runways. Greater facilities. And so what had begun as makeshift became routine. Food and supplies, month in, month out. Soon it became clear that the West had not only won a victory against logistics, but also a model victory which drew the admiration of the world, thanks to the crews of the airlift. Victory through determination to defend the right.